let's talk about education generally. You're critical of the education system in this country. What do our schools do wrong in the way they teach our kids? You're a back to basics proponent, aren't you?
Yes. I mean, I'm going to try to explain this quickly, although really I need 2 hours. In the last 40 years or so, things have become a lot more progressive in our schools. So once upon a time, the desks were in rows and they faced the teacher and the teacher led the learning. Then, since the 60s and 70s, it's become more the children lead their learning. So you might look in a school, in a classroom, and you would see the desks in groups where the children face each other. And the teacher moves amongst the desks as more of a facilitator of learning, keeping the children on task, and the children lead their own learning. Now, the teacher has a degree, has been doing this for many years. It's the teacher who should be leading and should be teaching the children, not facilitating learning. We are traditionalists at Michaela, so that is how we teach. And we find that we get 600 visitors every year of teachers all around the world because our children make such fantastic progress. And when they do make loads of progress, their self-esteem builds, they become resilient, they become ambitious, and high achieving. That is the way forward for our schools. And I think now that we're going back in September with children having missed out on so much school, now is the time more than ever that we need to be using traditionalist methods in the classroom in order to help these children catch up, because the disadvantaged in particular are going to suffer at the moment because they have been away from learning for a very long time.
I think I understand what you mean by traditionalist methods. I'm sure that's what I had at my school, and Ash as well, because we're of a certain age. But how are kids taught now then? I mean, how does the system differ from traditionalist methods?
Okay, so in a classroom at Michaela, the teacher's standing at the front, the desks are in rows, the children are all looking at the teacher. The teacher might teach them something and tell them lots of information. And then they might have a class discussion, a little bit of pair work, and then they might do some written work where they're analyzing what they've just discussed in the class. In a more progressive classroom, the children might be given a task where they can write things on a piece of sugar paper, and they do some group work together, and the teacher is sort of helping them along as opposed to leading the learning and telling them lots of stuff. Yeah,
I get it. The former I very much recognise as exactly the sort of activities that you went on when I was at school. The latter is anathema to me. I don't understand that system at all. What about the political side of things? I mean, from what I read, of course, in the Daily Mail, but actually in all the papers, what I hear, I mean, basically kids are sat down. There's no question about climate change. That's terrible. That's happening.
Yeah.
It's this kind of groupthink.
You're not allowed to even discuss it.
This kind of groupthink teaching that the kids are being subjected to. Is that a problem?
Well, of course, it depends on the school and it depends on the teacher in their classroom. And teachers will inevitably perhaps push certain topics and ideas because that's what they enjoy and what they think is important. It is true that the teaching profession tends to be more left-leaning. So ideas that tend to dominate on the left perhaps dominate in our classrooms.
But then you end up with no platforming when they get to university because they don't want other people's views.
Yeah, that's Ash is right. That's what I'm getting at, Catherine. It seems to me that the state school system seems to churn out kids who have no capacity or desire to hear other opinions. And as Ash said, they get to university and then they start no platforming people because horror of horror, they don't think the same as them. That's a bad education system, isn't it?
Yes. Well, and that
good
would
answer.
That would point to what I was just saying about how they've led their learning the whole time.
Yeah.
So if they haven't been led by adults, if the adult has been undermined as an authority in the classroom, then they don't recognize a sense of authority. And of course, the reason why that's happened is because people mix up authority with authoritarian, and they think that authority can be abused. And of course it can be, but for those minute number of times where that happens, we seem to have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. The adult and the parent should always be in charge. And the child expects us to keep them safe and to lead them both in terms of their behavior and in terms of their learning. And if we don't do that for them, we are letting them down. The problem is that if you don't hold your standards high for them, allow them to fail over and over at school and help them pick themselves up and to keep on going and have competition and all the kind of old-fashioned ideas that would have been perfectly normal in a classroom in the 1950s, the problem is that later they become sort of snowflakey, as you're suggesting, and they get offended at the slightest thing, as opposed to having built up resilience and a whole bank of knowledge in their brains so that they can argue their point. Because brilliant if, I don't know, they might know platform Melanie Phillips or Amber Rudd or whoever it is,
Jermaine Greer was my favourite. Jermaine Greer was my favourite. She got no platform.
Yeah. And the thing is that I'm more than happy for them to disagree, but they have to have the knowledge in their heads to be able to argue their points. And sadly, I do think the education is failing far too often to give them that knowledge and to give them the curiosity of finding out more and loving their subject. And that, again, comes down to the teaching methods. Too often in classrooms, we're choosing activities that help to engage them, as opposed to really challenging them, reading Shakespeare, doing hard maths, doing stuff that once upon a time would have been normal, whereas now it's all kind of, you want to do French rap instead of learning French verbs, for instance, in order to engage. And that means that our standards have been lowered and the children are not being challenged enough. And the idea, and what's even worse, is that the more disadvantaged you are, the more likely it is that the teacher will feel that you can't handle tough stuff in the classroom. And that breaks my heart, because those children are the ones who need it all the more, so that they have a chance to compete with their more affluent peers when they get to university and later on out in the workplace.
I'll tell you, this is, I haven't got kids, but if I did, I'd send them to your school, Catherine. But this
I'm glad to hear that.
This is how old I am. When you misbehaved and you weren't paying attention in the class, the teacher hit you.
Capital punishment.
And at this point, I think I'm supposed to say, it never did me any harm.
Did you a lot of good, didn't it, Kev?
The thing is that really isn't necessary. All you
I know it's not.
is a system of merits and demerits and detention.
Yeah,
you know what? Children don't want to let the teachers down. If they have respect for their teachers and admire them as being in a position of authority, they will not want to let them down.
Yeah.
And our children are super happy. People call me the strictest teacher in Britain. Look, it's silly. You come to our school, you see joyful, happy children loving their learning, building up their resilience so that they can go out in the world and take their rightful place in the world, because their minds are filled with critical thinking tools and knowledge. That is what a school is meant to do. But too often we go for the lowest common denominator and just trying to engage them and trying to get them to sit in their chairs in the classroom, because we don't have any proper behavior systems in the school that hold the children to account. And essentially, being a bit tough and holding the line with children is to love them. That's what people don't understand. I love children. I don't turn up to school every morning.
But you can't learn the way you learn to teach, is it? That's in you, isn't it? You couldn't learn, really.
What do you mean? You couldn't learn?
Your confidence, your passion. Some people going to teaching won't be like,
I think Kathy could pass it on.
If you could,
I'm betting she does.
Yeah.
I don't teach in my classrooms. It's my teachers who are teaching. And I tell you, they're all like me.
Good.
There are teachers like me across the country. The problem is that they're dotted around, and there's too much. We haven't got that throughout the system. And what we teach training colleges encouraging this kind of thing, and I do think we fail when it comes to teacher training. But we're winning slowly. We are. We get 600 visitors every year. People are being persuaded. Be positive.
No, it sounds amazing. Every parent should want to send their kid to your school. But just before you go, we're running out of time. It's been fascinating. Just one concept I'd like to throw at you. Grade inflation, 30% of kids get A's. They all jump for joy. Everybody passes. Isn't it about time we reintroduced our kids to the concept of failure?
Yeah.
You failed your exams. So they know about the joy of success, because they also know about the sheer depression of failure.
Absolutely. In fact, school is the time to fail. So we do quizzes every single week. To get them used to failure, so that they can build up resilience to that. The successful people do not avoid failure. Successful people, when they fail, they pick themselves up and they keep on going. And that is a skill that you need to teach children. And unless you allow them to fail over and over again, they will never learn to pick themselves up. And they will fail at life. And so it's absolutely crucial that we test them all the time so that they learn how to fail and pick themselves up again.